wanted to make a video talking about what I wish young people in the church knew about sex. And I don't even have any notes, so we will see if this makes any sense later. I think you'll hear a lot from progressive Christians and people who were religious in the past but are no longer, that purity culture is a bad thing and it's done a lot of damage. And on one level, I do agree with that a lot, but on another level that hasn't quite been my experience, I think people like to make this distinction between purity culture and just the church having a rule about no sex before or outside of marriage, and say, well, it's okay to have that rule as long as you don't put purity culture on top of that, as long as you don't put in all the body shaming aspects of it. And the way I feel is you kind of can't really enforce that rule in a meaningful way unless you also bring in the heavy shame and the heavy guilt. The churches that I went to were never that big into purity culture. We didn't have a whole lot of really icky illustrations with, say, like the shredded rose petals or the licked candy bars or anything like that, and say, oh, that's you. Teenagers, if you had sex outside of marriage, you're used and no one wants you anymore. But they did have the rule that it's definitely a sin if you have sex with your boyfriend or girlfriend or anyone else before you're married. Even if you're, say, engaged to someone, you still are definitely sinning if you don't wait for the wedding night. That one particular ceremony makes everything legit that was evil before. So I actually didn't date at all as a teenager, and not really till I was in my 20s, 23, 24. But even though I was in churches that would have said they weren't doing purity culture, they did really manage to make me feel like crap about myself. And it's not like I was going up to them and telling people about my sex life either. That wasn't something I brought up, but just the overall attitude they had that what I and my partner, what we did with our own bodies was everybody's business, and they had some entitlement to tell us what to do in our relationship, and to say, oh, you better not like have them stay too late at your place, you better get separate rooms if you travel together because temptation, something might happen, like you're not taking this seriously, like you should be more careful, I'm like worried about like you sinning, or like just that whole vibe that we were this like not quite legitimate relationship that everyone like had the right to weigh in on and tell us what we should be doing, and to say like we know better than you, blah blah blah, and to have that kind of antagonistic relationship with us because we were not really seen as a real couple. And people who were married, even married couples who were younger than us, like married couples who admitted they had some issues living up to the purity ideals themselves, were still seen as this ideal, this aspiration, and anything they said or believed was therefore legitimate in a way that anything I said was not legitimate, because they had the social standing and the marriage license to prove that they were a real couple, and we weren't. And just the idea that if I did certain physical things, like even if they were things that brought me happiness and brought my partner happiness, they were this dirty secret that we couldn't tell anyone. And if people knew, they would definitely judge us. And if people suspected, they would have the right to lecture us and scare us off. It was a really toxic dynamic to be experiencing, especially because at that time I was living abroad, working, living in a share house, supporting myself, and yet I had people, some of which who weren't even my friends, who didn't even like me, telling me that they didn't approve of my relationship and that if I expressed too much physical affection with my partner, then I was sinning. I just wish they had been more like, hey, we're here, like, if you ever want to talk about how your relationship is going and get insights and advice, we just want to make sure that you're safe and you're doing well. We're not here to judge you. I think having more people like that would have been more loving and more Christ-like, even if I knew at some level that they were, or even if I knew straight out that they would have said, it's probably better to wait for some sexual things until you're married. If there was this communication that they would have still been my friends and that they would have accepted my decisions even if they didn't agree with them, then I think that would have been a better dynamic. And I did have one friend who didn't go to my church, but who did identify as Christian, but she was a lot less judgmental about what sex I might or might not have been having in my relationship. And she didn't really feel that for herself she wanted to wait till marriage either. So I'm filming again because an alarm went off that should not have gone off, but it did. So it was nice to have that one friend because I never felt that she was judging me, and it was someone that was safe that I could talk to about relationship stuff, and I knew I could always go to for advice. I think that the way I view sex is that wanting to have a sexual relationship with the person you're romantically interested in is as natural as wanting to eat food that's delicious to you until you're full and you feel like you're no longer hungry. And I think that both of those desires can go wrong. For example, if you're lactose intolerant, you probably shouldn't drink a milkshake because it will make you sick. You should have something without any dairy in it. Or even if you're really hungry, it's kind of a jerk move to steal your coworker's lunch because your coworker's probably going to get mad at you later when they're hungry and suddenly their lunch is gone. You should probably at least offer to buy them a new lunch if you steal their lunch. But I think that trying to pretend you're not hungry at all and trying never to be full and eat until you're full is a losing battle, and even if you win it, you're probably not going to be happy. Continuing the food analogy, yes, there's definitely people out there who have an unhealthy relationship with food, but I would say it's either because they're using food as a replacement for other things, like maybe food is the only way they know how to express love or the only way they know how to calm down when they're in a stressful situation. And that's why they're binging, because they need more tools in their relationship toolbox to express themselves. Or it could be they're following a super restrictive diet where they're not getting the nutrients they need and that's making them miserable. And in neither case would I judge the other person. I would just say, hey, you don't seem happy. I think there's something wrong. You should talk to someone and try to figure this out. Putting like one sexual rule, you're not allowed to touch people in this way until this particular date is kind of like putting a very hard rule on what kind of foods people eat. That's just a rule. Everyone's got to follow it no matter what, without any more context or any more nuance about why we even have the rule in the first place. So if I could talk to young people who are in the church now and are not quite sure how they feel about their sexuality, I would probably say that rather than thinking about what parts are and are not okay to touch other parts, because that'll just lead you down some weird rabbit holes really fast, and pretty soon nothing will make sense and you'll just end up incredibly frustrated. Instead, I think that you should take some time and consider how you can use your sexuality to better promote your happiness and the happiness of the person that you care about. Ask yourself, rather, will God get offended if this touches that? Ask yourself, well, how do I feel when we make out, or when we don't make out, or when we hold hands, or when we don't hold hands? Why do I want to hold hands? Like, what am I looking for? Like, why does it make me feel good or not good? Is this making the other person happy, or is this making the other person miserable? Because there could be even things that you're ready for that you enjoy and you don't think are wrong, but the other person feels kind of about them. And in that case, saying, okay, let's walk this back. Let's just chill out and enjoy each other's company without pressuring things to be that physical, at least for now. That could be a real act of love towards the other person, because then they're like, oh, phew, like I don't have to do anything I don't want to do. And the other person can feel, hey, like I really feel comfortable in this relationship. I really feel like I can trust my partner, and they like things about me more than just my body. So that's an example of a time where pulling back physically could be really good, but it really has nothing to do with like I didn't even have to say like what physically might have been going on or not going on. It could have been anything. And I think that's a more enlightened way to think about your sexuality, rather than trying to chronicle the exact body parts that Jesus is going to get mad if you touch before a certain contract is signed. And you do kind of have to experiment a little bit and be willing to make mistakes if you're so worried about, oh my goodness, if this touches this, then we'll be dirty, we'll have messed up, we'll have done a big sin, and Jesus will be mad. Then that's like a really negative and terrible place to be mentally. I think it is better to just chill and say, you know what, if we do something and it turns out that made us uncomfortable, we can just not do that again. And now we know, because we did it and it was bleh. And I think that doing something and finding out you don't like it will give you so much more motivation not to do it again than if you are just told, don't do that ever because it's a sin. To me, I think that basically all the ways that we love God kind of boil down to loving each other and treating each other right. So I don't think that God is sitting up in heaven offended because people are having sex outside of marriage. I think that if God is offended, he's offended by people treating each other badly, being jerks, or just using each other for their bodies. And he's mad when that happens in a marital relationship and people aren't treating each other right, or when it's happening outside of a marital relationship. I think he just wants people to treat each other better. At the very least, I think that sins of sexual excess are more on the venial sin side. I don't think that they're mortal sins. And I know that's really more of a Catholic thing than an evangelical thing, but I think it's more something that you can improve on something that you could work on doing more ethically, and you could work on not letting it rule your life to the exclusion of everything else. If you're obsessed with having sex all the time, then that's probably just going to make you a jerk, and you won't do other good things that you could be doing, and you won't live a well-rounded life and be there for the other people in your life. And I think that that's a problem, but less in the, oh my gosh, if you do it, you're dirty, a sinner, and maybe you're not really a Christian, you're going to hell. Less on that spectrum and more on the, you could be living in a more thoughtful, more conscious way, and you'll probably also be happy for it kind of spectrum. If that makes any sense. Another thing that I definitely found growing up in the church with this hard rule of no sex before marriage is that they'll really try to have it both ways. They'll preach that if you have sex when you're just dating and before you've gotten married, then it'll definitely make you miserable. But also, if it doesn't make you miserable, then you're sinful for wanting this physical happiness above following God's rule. So if you have sex with your boyfriend and it ends badly, then they'll be like, ha, I showed you. And if you have sex with some people that you're dating and you're not married yet, and you're like, it didn't really make my life worse. Like, I'm glad I got that experience. And I think that I'll still have a good sexual relationship with the person I end up marrying. And if they have experience with other people, then that's fine too. Then the church will say, but that's the world's logic. You should care more about doing what God says than being happy. And like, either way you lose, and either way they're somehow always right even when they're wrong. And that makes me very suspicious. And I think that sexual ethics can be very different for different people. What is wonderful for one person might be absolutely terrible for another person. Something like sex is a lot more about finding out what works for you rather than there being one golden rule that works for everyone. And I don't think that there is necessarily a point in sticking to a certain rule if it's not serving you. That's really getting away from, we follow God's rules because we think they're worth following, not because we're trying to show how good and righteous we are. I do believe that there isn't really a point in following moral rules just to follow them if you can't come up with a good reason why they're making things better for you or for other people. And if you really don't want to follow them, but the only reason you're following them is because people tell you that you have to, then you'll just be going round and round in this battle with yourself, and it'll make you miserable. Whereas with the other rules, like don't drink a milkshake if you're lactose intolerant, the reason is very clear and obvious. And you know what? If you drink that milkshake and you're sitting on the toilet for an hour afterwards in misery, then, well, there you go. You drank the milkshake. You shouldn't have drunk the milkshake. Now you're miserable. There you go. That's it. It's a very clear and obvious reason why that rule exists. And I think in that case, you get clarity and you get consistency. Like maybe you'll figure out, oh, I can drink this much milkshake, but not this much milkshake. Okay, that kind of makes sense. And that's okay. And maybe someone else who's lactose intolerant can't touch any milkshake at all. Or maybe you can take the medicine that gives you the enzyme that digests lactose. And as long as you are careful about that, you can drink milk and you can eat ice cream. And if you mess it up, well, yeah, that's gonna suck because you'll get really bad stomach cramps and you'll probably be on the toilet for a while, but it's not the worst thing in the world either. Yeah, milkshakes and lactose intolerance is kind of my go-to metaphor for sex. You kind of need to find out what works for you And once you find that good balance, it will be obvious. So now I'm in my 30s, and I think when you're in your 30s, you just care less what people say, and people are much less shocked to figure out that you're not a virgin. And I think also there are more progressive Christians who just are really tired about trying to police other people's sex lives. And now I've found that even when I talk to people who have only had sex with their spouse after marriage, talking about sex and sexuality and what works and what doesn't work, not in an explicit way, because these are my platonic friends, we have a lot more in common than we have differences, really. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and we were just talking about how, both of us felt that sex was pretty weird until we actually found someone we trusted and cared about. And then, there was still an awkward learning curve, but it eventually became a really great thing. And how, you kind of need someone who cares about you as a person and is willing to invest in the relationship to make sex good. And that was something that we both found out just through experience. And it didn't even really matter that one of us waited to have sex until marriage and one of us didn't. There was still so much we had in common about the way we thought about sex and in the way we found that sex needs to be fulfilling. And that's kind of cool. I kind of wish that everyone could just be open and talk about their experience in a non-judgmental way. And I think that we should just view sex as a part of human flourishing and understand that it's a desire that many, many of us have, and we're just trying to figure it out and not bring down the hammer of punishment on people who have it a little bit too soon as considered by society. And if we give people advice, to give advice more from a place of caring and a place of, I want you to be safe, I want you to be happy, I want you to be able to enjoy your relationship, rather than but did this touch this? Because that's evil and wrong place. Hopefully, I think we're going that way, and I'm definitely more that way. I do not judge people who have sex outside of marriage. I don't judge people who are consensually polyamorous. I don't get that. Just be honest and be safe. I don't judge people who never want to have sex. I don't judge people who want to be married before they have sex with their partner. I think there's a wealth of human experience, and I'm interested in learning about people's different experiences as long as they treat each other well. And that is my view on sexual ethics. Bye! Thanks for listening.